Good. How are you?
Yeah. We just got done with the big comprehensive owner survey.
Tim, I just got the name of the budget manager, so I can send you an email with this. You want me to connect you with them? Or-
Yeah, if you would. Okay.
Yeah. Would be interesting. We can have, you and James and I can have a conversation.
Poll's a good idea.
Sure, and talk about it.
And
We asked a lot of good questions about side yards, so we'll get some good feedback on that as well.
Awesome.
But also about the center, the current.
So do you want me to?
And our budget doesn't
Well,
go into play until
Good to see you.
July
Yeah.
1st, but it's,
That
we're
works.
going into the budget
That could be
night.
one of these
That's gonna
And
be
then I could,
a real
you know,
problem.
tackle the
Alright.
subjects
I
or
figured that.
vice versa.
Yeah, no, I think that would probably be good.
If you want to
Okay.
start everything, like, when.
Probably
it's like-
July, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, like, yeah, that might be.
Did you read all 1,500 pages?
No.
Yeah, I don't know the exact amount, you know, between Redmond and Bend, it's roughly 300,000, 280,000.
Owner survey are called now, 600 pages of data.
Wow.
Loaders.
Okay,
That's a lot, dude.
it
Get
is,
through all of that.
it is.
Chiverson River, right?
Underground.
You work with Jim Frost?
I do work with Jim some, yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, he does a lot of work there.
Yes, he does.
Right?
See you guys.
Yeah, good to see you.
Impressive reports.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Very detailed.
You got through it all?
Liked it.
All
Yep.
1,300 pages?
But yes.
Okay,
Awesome.
good.
But you know, focusing on the zoning stuff, you know,
Yes,
that's kind
yes.
of my.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Those fun
Expertise.
areas,
Yeah.
I should forward you the recent email in coordination with PLM.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
do, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
great, yeah.
It was a good meeting.
Yeah.
Good,
Mhm.
good to hear that,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as I was walking down the stairs, I was like, okay. Avenues of challenge, you know, and I was like, okay, so it's not just like the farm impacts test, it's like, who's gonna be mounting those challenges, you know, I mean, like, you know.
Yeah.
My lord.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's opportunities with
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely, well, really good work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's still an hour until the meeting. Oh, okay. Wait a minute.
Right, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that clock.
This clock is always a little fast.
I would have thought the commissioners would have had that update.
The clock is always like a couple
Yeah.
minutes early.
Is it?
Because with
Yeah,
commissioners
yeah.
meetings, it's
Oh,
always
yeah.
like, they're done with the pledge of allegiance by the time I log in.
Oh.
It's 9 on the computer.
Yeah.
They're like 2 minutes. out.
Okay, yeah. Boy, it really.
I told him yesterday, oh man, now it's a torture party. I want to say that. That's not what we do. Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. This thing you're doing right now? Yeah.
That means we get to go for next round.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
We have many people online, Sue? Ed, Erica and Paul, okay. Well, good morning. I will call to order the March 19th meeting of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Tim Brownell. I'm the Director of the Solid Waste Department for Deschutes County. So I want to welcome you all here and thank the SWAC members for your continued involvement. And I know you had a lot of reading material for this
Yes.
meeting. Yeah. So calling the meeting to order, let me do roll call just to make sure that we have quorum here. If you're attending online, please let us know you're there. Paul Bertagna from City of Sisters.
Here.
Morning, Paul.
Good morning.
Jared Black, citizen at large. Luke Dines, citizen at large. Ed Fitch, City of
Here.
Redmond.
Here.
Good morning, Mayor.
Morning.
Keith Caceres, citizen at large.
Here.
Cassie Lacy, City of Bend.
Here.
Erica Lindberg, Republic Services. She's here. Okay. Chris Ogren, citizen at large.
Here.
Morning, Chris. Mike Riley, the Environmental Center. See online, Sue? Okay. Erwin Swetnam, Cascade Disposal. And Robin Vora, citizen at large. Robin's not here. Mike Riley, walked in, so he's here. So we have quorum. All right, so I'd like to review and approve the February meeting minutes. So is there a motion to approve?
I will make a motion to approve the minutes that we're meeting.
Thank you, Keith. Is there a second?
No second.
Erwin seconds. Any discussion, modifications, edits? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm gonna abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Chris abstains. All right, thank you. So now it's time for public comment. So if there's any members of the public, either in person or online who want to speak, now is the time. So if you'd like to make a comment, please come on up front to the microphone. Yeah.
Go ahead. No, you're. Oh, you go first. And then I That's the way it works at Deschutes County.
Right.
We support each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you'll state your name, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mark Salvo. I'm the Conservation Director at Oregon Natural Desert Association based here in Bend, Oregon. ONDA has been pleased to be part of this process since early 2023. We commented on sites proposed then, particularly in the eastern portion of Deschutes County, in desert habitats and wilderness areas that we work every day to protect for Deschutes County, Oregonians, and the country. We then met with county staff last autumn to learn more about, discuss options, and express our concerns about some of the sites that were being considered for a future landfill. We provided information and maps to the county's consultant to support their report to the county and to the Solid Waste Committee examining the Moon Pit and Roth East sites. With decision-making now having reduced siting to 2 locations, we conducted our own deep analysis of potential impacts of a landfill to wildlife, wilderness, and recreational values. That analysis is available to you. It's submitted to the meeting record today. We appreciate, of course, that the committee has got to consider a broad array of factors in making its recommendation on a future landfill. We get it. There's a lot to consider here. There's a lot of information to digest, and the decision is not an easy one. We thank you for your attention to the detail, the information, the data, and the service that you're providing here. Unfortunately, neither of these sites, in our perspective, are optimal for a landfill. Both would require extraordinary mitigation measures to offset the impacts that we've charted in our analysis and report. And we have bulleted some of what that could look like in that document. We welcome your review and consideration of them. In the end, we're glad to continue to provide information, our own recommendations to this process as it moves forward, and particularly if siting does end up landing on either Moon Pit or the Roth East location. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Wow. Short and sweet.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be quite that short. Perhaps sweeter.
My name is Steve Payer. I am a Realtor with Coldwell Banker Bain. I do not have an active listing on the property in question. I sold it to the Roth family. I don't know. Way back when I worked for Joe Friedman many, many years ago, and have become good friends with the Roths. So you might say, well, I'm biased. Not necessarily. Stephen lives in Oklahoma, so he's probably watching maybe on Zoom or online. Father Dave is out of state, be back soon. The only axe I have to grind is if they don't select the Roth East, I get to stay where I am. I get to live and live on it well. So if the county decides to go ahead, I've got to move. Anyhow, going through this 61-page packet, what I found, just a few salient items that I want to talk about. The thing about Roth East that I see is the tremendous amount of dirt, soil that is available just from scooping up with a front end loader to cover the garbage. I don't think that's quite the situation over at Moon Pit. The other thing with purchasing the Roth property, there's an extra 1,400 acres, more than 2 square miles, that can be used for the mitigation, or on down the road, as the population of Bend grows, all these folks are going to have to go somewhere to have fun. So there's another 1,400 acres there that would lend itself to some type of county use that wouldn't necessarily be the landfill. Any comments about visual impact, I think, are a red herring. I have driven the west side of Pine Mountain Road. There's a cut across Shorty Road there, and most of those structures that some people live in legally or illegally are in defilade, and you absolutely can't see up over the road and into the eastern part of the property. As far as the Lex, this gentleman would know if there are any out there. I've walked the subject property. I'm not sure I would know a Lek if I saw it, but I didn't see anything that resembled a Lek. And I told Stephen in a conversation this morning, here's the analogy real quick. If I'm a sage grouse and all of a sudden there's is that my 3 minutes?
No, sorry.
If all of a sudden there's something there where I used to court and spark, Joni Mitchell's famous song. It'd kind of be like when I was in college. We used to drive up to Pudding Stone Reservoir north of Pomona and park. So if one evening I drive up there and there's a big sign that says under construction, no parking, well, what's a red-blooded college boy going to do? He's going to find another place to park. So my guess is that the sage grouse would go, let's move. And it's been documented that the sage grouse like churned up areas. They like an open area where they can get out and strut and not worry about a raven or a coyote or a badger or whatever. sweeping up and catching them in the act. And the Bradovic well, which is an open area with a water trough that overflows, has had a lot of sage grouse sightings. I know the people that live just 50 yards away, and they're always talking about, oh yeah, we saw sage grouse, which is probably crow flies maybe a mile away from subject property. The Horse Ridge Trail enhancement that's on the line, BLM's got a comment period till March, right at the base of Horse Ridge, immediately across from the access into the Moon Pit. That whole area is going to get fixed up. Improved trails, safer trails, big parking area. So unless you come in to that area on the west entrance, you're going to be coming right up to the turn off the Moon Pit, and you're going to be turning right and coming in there. Now that's on down the road, but it's just some more traffic issues. Finally, there was a comment about some type of a archaeological site out in the area there, which I think was an old deconstructed Ramada type thing. It was a shed that perhaps years ago they stored hay in. And not only because I needed some firewood this winter, but also because it's an optimum roosting area for all the predators, the sage grouse. It no longer exists. So hopefully it wasn't on the Historical Society's list of preferred spots, and I'm going to get in trouble. But anyhow,
All right. Well, thank
that's
you,
all I
Steve.
have. Thank you very much.
We have Andrew Walsh signed up to speak. Morning, Andrew.
Yeah, good morning. For the record, I'm Andrew Walsh. I'm the district wildlife biologist for ODFW, based out of Bend here. And I just wanted to kind of check in and provide a few comments after reviewing the natural resources assessment. In general, a lot of my comments are kind of reiterating what was in the natural resource assessment. It was a very well done document with a lot of consideration for the two sites and the different mitigations. And so I wanted to just highlight the considerations and potential impacts to wildlife and their habitats in eastern Deschutes County to be considered during this final stage of this process. Both sites fall within or near mule deer and elk winter range and pronghorn range. The two different sites would have varying impacts on these three species. And those impacts and associated mitigations were outlined pretty well in the natural resource assessment. But I want to draw attention to and focus on the greater and more significant concern with this siting process is as it relates to wildlife habitat is sage grouse. Both sites are on the northwest edge of sage grouse range in Oregon. Sage grouse are easily impacted by development, habitat loss, noise, human presence, and predation. All those factors are certainly connected to landfill activities. A large source of predation for sage grouse nests and chicks is corvids, specifically ravens. Of course, landfills are a huge attractant to ravens and will inevitably increase raven presence in the immediate area around wherever the landfill is sited. This factor is a huge concern for biologists, as potential raven densities and impacts to nesting success is hard to quantify and mitigate. It's harder than just a polygon on a map and this many acres affected. But drawing ravens in and then them dispersing to their roosts and predating on sage grouse chicks and nests, it's hard to put a figure to that, which makes it hard for planning processes, I know. To circle back to kind of the sage grouse mitigation, large scale development in sage grouse habitat requires compensatory mitigation according to state and county laws. That's OAR 660-023-0115 is the state law requiring sage grouse mitigation for large scale development. A landfill certainly meets the qualifications for large scale development. That said, with large scale development in sage grouse habitat, the best practice is first try to avoid, then try to minimize, and then try to mitigate. If the landfill is going to be sited in sage grouse habitat, then we're kind of past the point of avoiding, and minimizing is the next step. Siting at Moon Pit and not Roth East would likely be a significant minimization to the impacts to sage grouse. The difference is outlined in the differing estimated mitigation requirements to each respective site. We worked with the folks with the consultant putting together the habitat assessment to get a rough estimate of what the required mitigation costs would be for the two sites. ODFW has a tool called the Habitat Quantification Tool, HQT. And it's a pretty complex algorithm that's used to calculate mitigation for impacts to sage grouse habitat. Again, it's more than just, okay, this development's going to be 80 acres. We need 80 acres of mitigation elsewhere. It takes into account the functional acres that are lost. So if it's 80 acres right along Highway 20 with power lines and buildings and everything already existing, that's not 80 functional acres. The functional acres there is going to be less. So, but if it's an intact piece of ground providing excellent habitat and it's getting converted, that's going to be a greater loss of the functional acres. So it's a sliding scale that kind of comes out the back end of this tool to do the impossible, which is put, numbers to habitat quality. It's a tough thing, but this is the tool that's used. It calculates the functional acres lost to development, not just the acreages on the map. This takes into account the condition of the habitat, existing development, distance from roads, etc. The functional acres that come out of the back end of the model can be more or less depending on the quality of the habitat and how severe the proposed impacts will be. We made it very clear during the process of working with parametrics that the figures of the kind of the preliminary run of this HQT tool were very preliminary and estimated, not knowing the exact development and where exactly on the landscape it's going to be within the polygons, but it should be a pretty good proxy comparative between the two sites. That was kind of the idea behind this preliminary run with the information we had. We worked closely with them to get a ballpark idea, and it should be viewed not as, okay, we need to write this number into the budget, because those things change just like the cost of everything change. Likely not getting cheaper, just like anything else. But it should be used as a comparison between the two sites for what that required sage grouse mitigation cost would be. So I'll run through the two sites real quick, just again outlining what's in the assessment. For the Moon Pit mine site, the output estimated that there would be 7.8 functional acres lost to the development. And since the state law requires a net conservation benefit, we add 15% to that acreage, and that's what must be restored or uplifted. So that means 9 functional acres of mitigation would be required for the Moon Pit site. The Moon Pit site is outside the low density sage grouse habitat zone, but it's close. It's close enough that some mitigation requirements are appropriate. Again, some of that comes from the corvid, the raven issue. They're not gonna stay at the landfill. They're gonna fly away to roost, entering sage grouse habitat. as well as the noise and other things that travel from, you know, from the site into the sage grouse habitat. So that's why there's a little bit of a mitigation cost for Moon Pit. 9 functional acres required, estimated in lieu fee mitigation wise would be $500,000. Again, just for that comparison. For the Roth site, the output of the model was 173.7, 174 functional acres lost. So you add the 15% to that gets you to 199.3 functional acres of sage grouse habitat would have to be restored and or uplifted. For comparison's sake, the last one was $500,000. This one, the estimate is 7.6 million in lieu fee would be the estimated mitigation cost for that. We're not just requiring 199 acres to be restored on the map. We're requiring 199 functional acres of restoration. That may take several hundred more acres of that being restored to, depending on where they're at, the already existing condition of that habitat, what the outcomes are. You kind of run the model to estimate it on the front end, and you're running the model to estimate on the back end to make sure you're meeting that 199 functional acres. I know it's really in the weeds, but it's important because this will be a factor for the county for this process. And obviously we're here to work through it. So the Roth site, kind of to wrap that comparison up, is completely within low density sage grouse habitat, and it's nearby core habitat, which is, we have 2 categories of sage grouse habitat, low density, and then core is kind of it's the core. I mean, it's a good word to describe it, but it's the higher density of Lex and sage grouse habitat is within core, and that increases the mitigation needs when you're within or nearby that.
Just checking on,
Yep.
do you have much more?
2 more paragraphs and I'll move quicker now. I'm
All right.
out of the weeds now.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
So one of the more important things I want to point out, on-site mitigation on the neighboring Roth property. We would caution the county that may not be an effective mitigation option for sage grouse. Given the increased noise, disturbance, and especially corvid populations that will be associated with the landfill right next door. ODFW strongly advises the county to not count on being able to use that neighboring property to meet sage grouse mitigation requirements with on-site vegetation treatments for the neighboring property. So I just really wanted to flag that because it was kind of thrown out there in the assessment. Don't count on being able to use that neighboring property for mitigation and meet the requirements by state law. We haven't run those numbers or anything, but it's just at face value. Something to consider. We have a research project going on in the nearby area out there with sage grouse, and are seeing that nest survival is a limiting factor to their population and part of the reason for the population decline. Raven densities are already high, and adding to that could well lead to further declines of the sage grouse population in eastern Deschutes County. It stands to reason that the closer to sage grouse habitat the new landfill is sited, the more of an impact we'll have. ODFW encourages the county to consider the impacts to wildlife and their habitats when finalizing a new site for the landfill. And we're always available and right here in town for questions and coordination. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Tim, can I ask you a quick
Uh,
question, really quick?
Very quick.
So we're killing the barred owl to protect the spotted owl. That's obvious, the Northwest Forest Program. We're gonna kill the barred owls because they're killing the spotted owl. Is there a way forward? Do we have a hunting season on ravens?
So we real quick.
Yeah.
We are in the Baker Pack up in Baker City. We've been attempting removing raven nests and taking ravens the last few years to see if there's a response, and it's really, really difficult to do. And a landfill won't help that effort.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. That's who I have signed up. Is there any other public comment? Yeah. Please come up and state your name.
My name is Harrison Ruffin. I'm a resident of Deschutes County. I just wanted to kind of extend off of what this gentleman before me was talking about and add into the. I believe there will be increased difficulties in the permitting process, especially on the Roth East, or you were going to try the Roth West site, due to all of the things that he said, but also due to the fact that there's some new legislation. Maybe this has already been discussed. Sorry, I went to the wrong location. But the Biden administration, the BLM, has just passed a pretty extensive sage grouse new plan, mitigation plan, or environmental assessment risk plan, or I'm not getting my terminology correct, but it looks like they will up the levels of many of the sage grouse habitat. So stuff that might have been considered low will now be high. And you know, they're spending a great deal of money to try and restore habitat. And there's a great deal of discussion about sagebrush and how the sagebrush has contributed to water quality in this part of the country and habitat for many species, not just the sagebrush, pygmy rabbits, mule deer, antelope, on and on. And the removal of more sagebrush next to core habitat, which might be, you know, relabeled as something greater than core, would potentially make the permitting process for the landfill significantly more difficult and more costly. And I think that none of those things would apply at the Moon Pit site like they would at the Roth sites out in the Milliken Valley. And I would just think, you know, as a county, one, we would want to work with the federal agencies on these plans and not be directly in almost opposition of them. You know, it doesn't seem like that would be in our best interests or in the best interest of the sage grouse. My understanding is there's only about 800,000 of them left. And this latest plan is a real effort to try and keep the sage grouse off of the endangered species list. And of course, if they were to get on that list, well, if that was to happen before the landfill is actually sited, I'm pretty sure it'd be nearly impossible to locate a landfill out there. And might inhibit further development eastward in the county. And so I think it's in everybody's best interest to try and keep the birds off of the endangered species list and, you know, work with the plan that's just been put in place. And it seems like locating a landfill right next to sage grouse habitat in opposition with that. That's all.
Thank you.
Probably somebody already said all of that stuff.
No, thank you, Harrison. Morning.
Morning, Linda Swearingen. I'm a representative of Moon Pit, and I just want to reiterate what I've said before, but for those who haven't had an opportunity to hear this, we worked directly with ONDA and the community to have the Badlands designated as a wilderness area. And we've been a good neighbor all these years, and gravel mining has continued to continue before that and will continue on. And I think the good news about the Moon Pit site is by reclaiming it as a solid waste area is going to reclaim that area sooner than if we just continue mining, because mining is going to continue on whether or not there's a landfill out there. It'll be beyond all of our lifetimes. And so we can take care of that sooner rather than later. And I think since it's already a disturbed site, we've already had a wildlife representative on board since the 90s. And we've worked to mitigate any problems out there with wildlife and with neighbors. And we'll continue to do so. And I think there's a pathway forward to protect wildlife and protect the experience out of the Badlands. And so the good news is you've got a site that's already a gravel pit. What a great idea. Fill it up with solid waste. Get it reclaimed sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Any other public comment? Sue, do you have anybody online? No? All right. With that, I'll close the public comment. Thank you. Thank you all for here. So back to the agenda. You want to move to the next slide there? Just to show where we're at. So last meeting, we did a preliminary discussion of and overview of the findings. At this meeting, we really want to dive deeper into the draft summary report. Answer any questions that SWAC members have in regards to the report and findings and or if there are other questions that you feel are haven't been addressed within the report, so we can try and get those answered by next meeting. And our final plan meeting for this committee will be April 16th, Tuesday, April 16th, where we'll be asking the Solid Waste Advisory Committee to make a recommendation of the final site to the Board of County Commissioners.
That still looks doable.
What's that?
That still looks like a doable date. to finish.
We think so, but that'll be for you all to let us know. But that's our hope. It'll still take, there will be a couple public meetings for the Board of County Commissioners to go through before they can accept and or determine which will be the finalist site. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you for a review.
All right. I'll pick it up to start with. So this is very much your meeting. I mean, all the SWAC meetings are your meetings, but this one in particular, because, you know, we've been presenting a lot of materials to you over the last 2 years, a lot of process, a lot of detailed information. You just received a report in the last couple of weeks that has a lot more detailed information, about 1,200 pages worth. And so this really is your opportunity to kind of query us, to raise questions, comments. You know, some of that will be, you know, we'll be able to answer maybe today, maybe not, and we'll come back to you with some of that. And so I just kind of want to make sure we lay that out. We're going to be pretty brief in our comments here, and we really want to hear from you and get your thoughts on the report. So up first here is the finalist sites. I mean, we know these well, Moon Pit and Roth East, you know, both out Highway 20. And as we've kind of discussed in areas of various natural resource issues, as well as recreation issues that have come forward. And those are kind of some of the considerations that we have. You want to go to the next ones. So one of the things that we've done is to lay out some key considerations that we see for each of the sites. This isn't to just say that these are them, but it's kind of to tee this up so that you have some thoughts, and really to kind of get your thoughts on these areas. But you know, we've kind of broken these out into schedule and cost considerations. You know, we've been through a lot on these two sites from the standpoint of general feasibility, fatal flaw analysis, as you might recall when we first brought out the criteria. And so these sites are feasible, but there are additional considerations that we need to look at with these, and really kind of come to the fore on both of them. So with Moon Pit, what we see is kind of the key schedule considerations is the surface mine zone, text amendment process, and that we have to go through. So the SM zone, that can take, you know, 1 to 2 years. It can, you know, then go into the conditional use permitting, which could take another 1 to 2 years. So, you know, that's potentially 4 years worth of process there. So that's one consideration with that site. Securing the BLM right of way, it may trigger the NEPA review process. It will trigger it in some manner. I mean, it could be a a declaration of non-significance, but probably not. And so it'll probably go into some review level. That can be 1 to 3 years. If it's a full EIS, 3 to 5 years to go through that process. So those are pretty significant time issues that are in there that could impact Moon Pit. Now, that's not to say that all of that is in series. The work on the BLM right of way, that would be at the same time as the SM text amendment process. So those are overlapping time periods there. Some cost considerations. You probably saw these in the report. We've talked about them a fair amount. Well, there's the acquisition cost and initial development being quite a bit higher than at Roth East, 15 to $29 million more. A lot of this revolves around the aggregate quality, marketability of that material, and especially in that first phase of the landfill, of what would be the landfill out at Moon Pit. Not as quite as high a quality of rock there. That's one reason why they've moved into the upper area on that site, just to get better rock. And so that, it all depends on how that aligns with market and, the ability to pull that material out and put it into the market. So that's a cost consideration. Yeah.
Is that the spread in the 15 to 29 million?
Yes, it is. Yep.
All rock.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the big issue there. I think it was mentioned how Roth East is a lot easier to pull material out of, and it is. I mean, at Moon Pit, it's pretty much a blast and excavate process, which is more intensive, obviously, and being more intensive, more costly, unless you can use that rock for some other purpose.
Clarify one thing, if we have a partnership with Hooker Creek, I'm still not clear as to what they would do and what the county would do. Wouldn't Hooker Creek be doing a lot of that blasting and removal if they're going to be selling the stuff?
Yes, and I'll kind of pull it back. Just it's not necessarily Hooker Creek. It could just a developer or a quarry operator. But yes, but that's still part of the overall process, to develop that cell. So for instance, out at Knott, and you might want to describe how it's done out there, Tim, but it's all part of this process to bring, essentially a quarry operator in a way to remove material to get it prepped for development.
But still, if somebody owns that site and they're going to be mining it as part of a partnership, it seems like these costs would be a lot lower if they did the mining and made money on it.
And that's true. The thing is what is the quality of the material in the areas that we need to have material removed? And so that's what goes into this calculation.
One point to add on that. In Appendix C, we included the site owner solicitation responses, and in that you can see what Hooker Creek has proposed is to excavate phase 3, which is the upper area where they're currently working. However, phase 1 is the lower area that would need to be developed for this initial development. And that doesn't include that kind of free airspace deal, so to speak. So what we've assumed on the lower end of that cost range, the 15 million difference, is $4 per cubic yard for a contractor. It could be put out to the open market for mining contractors to bid on to chew up that rock and use it off-site. $4 to do that work. Or if that doesn't work out economically, it's $12 per cubic yard for a contractor to just drill, blast, crush that material. So that would represent the higher end, the 29 million.
Landfill couldn't start at phase 3 area because you'd have to have Hooker Creek, whoever owns it, finished first.
Right. And there's a lot of material up there in phase 3.
We typically work upstream.
Yeah.
Like you start downslope.
Yeah.
With the leachate collection system and it's up.
Yeah. And just logistics for that site, it works best to start in what we call phase 1, which is the farthest northwest
And they
quadrant.
would go to the phase 1 area. Well, you would kind of meet in the middle somehow.
Yeah, it's hard to say because what you come down to is you've got landfill phasing the same time you got mine phasing. And so, you know, it will be a dance, so to speak, you know, and how that's all done, if that site's chosen. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what the report is saying is it is arranged depending on kind of the timing that we're doing the excavation. What are the external market conditions and need for aggregate? Some of it is high quality aggregate, some of it, as we say in cell one, may not be high quality, so it wouldn't be an ODOT spec, but may have other uses. And not as an example where it wasn't an ODOT. It wasn't for road department specification, but it had other aggregate uses and it ended up not being a cost to us at the times that we were putting it out over the last several cell developments. So we're just saying that there's a cost risk in this site that there's a spread based on market conditions and who we're using and when we're doing it.
And this is kind of one of those classic examples too, where it's a cost risk that is partly based upon schedule, because you need to do a certain amount of excavation, you know, in the initial development, that first cell out there. And so you have to do that excavation. Whereas, you know, future cell development, you've got some time. And so you can work that out over a longer period of time, you know, work the markets and so to speak. So, yeah.
So figuring out the lifetime cost, then what did you assume a number somewhere between 15 and 29? Figure out those costs, because my understanding when we look at the lifetime cost, there's basically a wash between the two sites over the roughly 100 years. And if anything, the Moon Pit's a little bit cheaper.
Right.
Right.
But there's a range out there.
I understand. But
Right. And that's what's based.
That number, did you assume it was 22.5 billion, or, you know, in terms of these initial development costs? Or did you assume the lower one or the higher one? Which number did you use?
Well, this range is just for the initial acquisition and initial development costs. And that's the low and high range being, I think, 50 million and 64 million for the development costs, initial acquisition and development costs for Moon Pit relative to Roth East.
So for the projected lifetime cost, then, which did you use, the higher scenario or the lower scenario?
So
we have both.
We have both of them in there.
In the table.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
$43 a ton over the 100-year life using the lower estimate and $48 using the higher estimate.
I think you'll like this graph in the end. This shows the full lifespan cost and kind of when the annual costs hit, and then also the cumulative costs that do show what you're referring to. And generally what we found is that if compared apples to apples, sorry, we're jumping ahead a little bit.
No, that's good. That's what the whole point with this.
Yep. So Roth East, if cut off at 100 years to present an apples to apples comparison to Roth East, because it does have a longer lifespan. So that would result in a larger, you know, lifespan cost, but also more solid waste. If you cut it off at 100, close it, and then it falls in between that range of the low end of Roth East, or low end of Moon Pit, and high end of Moon Pit, that range of assumed excavation costs. So I think your assessment's right. It is long-term, more or less could be a wash. And there's a crossover point you see, at least on the low range of Moon Pit, around year 2114, where it's projected to become more expensive than the lower cost rate and for Moon Pit, based on the additional operating costs for additional haul.
So we'll jump back here real quick onto cost considerations. So I think this is great that we can jump onto Roth. I want to make sure I got my so on Roth East, you want to bring up Roth East. Yeah, here we go. So schedule considerations, we still kind of come down onto zoning issues. So we have EFU zoning, the conditional use permit process, the farm impacts test, which is probably the most significant piece in there, which could lead to lengthy land use board appeals. And so that's you know, we're saying that process is 1 to 2 years, but it could go longer depending on those appeals. But still probably less there than for Moon Pit, just because of you know, how things line up as far as the zoning out there. As we've talked about here quite a bit, the other big issue out at Moon Pit, out at Roth East, is the sage grouse mitigation. So planning and approval process, and the cost of that mitigation. That is a significant additional cost at Roth East that we're not seeing at Moon Pit. Our mitigation had considered the possibility of on-site mitigation. You know, the point that was raised that might not be possible. So that's another cost consideration, and, you know, kind of sliding that one up somewhat more based upon that. Some of the other cost considerations that we're looking at, it's a longer drive out there. And as we've talked about in the past, that does add about $800,000 a year initially for the hauling of waste out there. And that just increases every year based upon both inflation as well as the increased amount of material going out there based on growth. So, you know, the purchase of additional land and grazing rights, it is possible, you know, that can be acquired, you know, for, you know, $1.5 to $3 million. Could be used for some wildlife mitigation, but likely not sage grouse as was raised here. Water rights is another issue out at, you know, fairly significant issue out at Roth East, you know, whether it's available. And so near term, you know, looking at the actual hauling of water out to the site for operations and construction. And that's a fairly significant cost. But at the same time, it is worked in there, so it's a doable cost for an operation standpoint. So those are kind of, oh yeah, go ahead.
One other question.
Yeah.
It was in the report, and also the person from ODF&W mentioned that the fee in lieu payment of like $7.5 million, is that on top of this 1.5 to 3 million? Is that instead of mitigation, you can do the fee in lieu, or how does that factor in?
Yeah, I think I could comment on that, and you can correct me if you're wrong, but this is additional than above what is already included in the analysis. So if in discussions with ODFW and other folks, it's determined that we should be purchasing additional land. So what we have in this is $5.5 million to buy Roth East and roughly half of Roth West.
Okay.
If we had to purchase all of Roth West to assist in mitigation, and then potentially see if the Roths would sell the grazing rights that they have BLM or Forest, I think it's Forest Service grazing rights up on Pine Mountain. And it may be important to actually get those grazing rights to expand the possibilities of what mitigation could be done, including the removal of junipers and removal of grazing.
Okay, and then is the fee in lieu part of it, that's like built into the site development cost or something already?
It is not fully built in here yet. But that's a good point. That is an upfront cost. And so it's part of that initial development cost is covering that as well.
And Taya, I think you're on the line, so feel free to dive in virtually if you'd like to comment on this. What we have in the natural resource assessment is a presentation of various mitigation options, and the simplest but most expensive option, typically it's fee in lieu. But there are other more collaborative strategies with permittee responsible mitigation where, in this case, the county would come up with a mitigation project and do the work. And if that meets ODFW's requirements, that could turn out to be less expensive, but it's more complicated and there's more involvement by.
It's 7.5 fee in lieu. The other options.
And yep. And that number is very helpful, like Andrew said, to give you a kind of an order of magnitude difference in terms of both functional acres impacted, the mitigation acres, and the fee in lieu cost. But there are other more maybe more creative options for mitigation, and in the natural resources assessment, a cost estimate number was given that kind of represented the median cost. That would be more of a permittee responsible mitigation approach. So somewhere in the middle.
So which number was used then in the cost projection, that middle number?
So
Full loaded 7.5.
it's not, it
It's
wasn't
not
that full
that.
amount. The initial mitigation cost was 1.5 million for Roth. And then a fair bit less, I would imagine, for,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
And there's a range in appendix,
Sounds like then that those bigger numbers, they're meant to be placeholders and sort of worst case scenarios are not factored into these cost pictures back here.
And if you'd like, we could probably,
Well, it seems that there's got to be some kind of placeholder to say this is what
Yeah.
it might be costing if we're really trying to project these
Yeah.
out accurately and do an apples to apples comparison. So it seems to me that those numbers should be.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And
In that five, whatever the max from ODF and W is in lieu of as a kind of proxy for max cost.
Yeah. Well, and
Hearing it's gonna cost more.
yeah.
than what we're, I mean, that's sort of.
Well, and yeah, and I think partly what we need to do and agree that, you know, this is some additional new information, somewhat nuanced information. And so that's why we need to bring these in. Yeah.
What about the additional acreage at Roth East and West, the purchase of that additional acreage? Is that an option?
Yeah, yes, it is. And we've been quoted a price for that as well.
I wonder if it'd be worth having that in.
yeah, the option that's included in the cost estimate is the median option, option 2, which is 5.5 million, including all of Roth East and the portion of Roth West that's east of Pine Mountain Road. The full combination of both Roth East and West parcels is approximately 7 million.
Yeah.
And so that's what's represented here by the additional 1.5 to 3 million for that Roth West portion being option 3 presented.
I agree with Mike. I think we ought to maybe have a little more of a gap showing the worst possible.
Mhm.
And-
Yes, we've done it with Moon Pit.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we'll do the same for Roth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good idea.
Tim, this is Paul. I just I got to jump off the meeting at 10. I just had one quick question on the variability in the Moon Pit development costs. Have you guys considered your road department using the Moon Pit for a rock source? Because currently Deschutes County does not own a pit and most counties do. Crook County and Jefferson County both own their own pits and they control their rock pricing, which has gone up drastically in the last few years. And so Deschutes County is having to pay market rate for their rock and they use a lot of it. And I didn't know if that's been considered and being a benefit to the overall county operations.
Yeah, to this point, it has not been considered. I think we'll have to look at what that would require out of both in regards to Dagami as well as is it a additional use of the site and how would that impact? One of our challenges there, Paul, is the right of way access. It's part of why we Hooker Creek and the county got into the position of Hooker Creek offering the entire site to purchase to the county so that it would be a transfer of right of way, not the application for an additional right of way. So we'd have to look at that issue as well. And we'll see what that might entail. All right.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you.
Tim, on that note, and if the county, if the Creek and the county come to an agreement, and they purchase the entire site, would there be some potential revenue for the county if Hooker Creek was allowed to maintain like phase 3 and continue mining? Is that built into this price at all?
Yeah, there's an option for Hooker Creek to maintain or to do excavation
Right.
and be entitled to do that excavation for consideration on the price. So we've modeled this. Did we model this? Yeah, the low end price is with them doing that,
Okay,
yes.
want to make sure.
Yeah.
It's a $500,000 difference.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Ask for some clarification, one, cost analysis on the Roth East West side. Was the Roth West purchase made, cost analysis made with the assumption that that would satisfy the wildlife mitigation requirements? Because it sounds like from the NRCS guy that would not let them satisfy those requirements.
It wasn't included in that it would satisfy it. It's possible that it could be an element of satisfying it. It also provided options of access to the site as well. So it wasn't purely for mitigation. It gives the county a lot of options, both towards mitigation as well as access to the site.
So then the acquisition of the west side could potentially not satisfy the mitigation requirements.
That's correct. We are not assuming that it does, but we are hopeful that it could be an element of it. Yes, but it's not the only reason why we're purchasing it. You want to move on?
Yep, yep.
Let's carry on. Thanks, Dwight.
Yep.
So now it's a bit of, what would we call it? Jeopardy, or just pick your topic?
Pick your topic.
Pick your topic. We know there's a lot here. And Aubrey worked in a cool feature. Is it still in there? The QR code?
Yeah.
There's an opportunity to scan this and tell us what topics you want to hit on and discuss further.
Talking about us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
There it
this is SWAC numbers. You can just use your phone, it's pulled everywhere, so there's nothing you have to download. You just kind of look through those 14 key topics, and if there's up to three that you think this is really where we want to spend the discussion time today, just to make sure we start there.
I don't know if those folks online heard Aubrey's comment. So on there's a QR code in the presentation packet that you received, that if you can pull that up, read it and pull it up, you can highlight the top three topics that you'd like to have addressed today or have questions on. So that can help guide some of our conversation. If we see the predominance are in three sections, if it's all over the place, we'll hit them all.
That's for it. There's my name, it says content missing. That's working for me.
And this is really for this.
Yeah, it's for the SWAC members. Yeah.
I do see there's some votes coming in, so I think if there's a SWAC member that's having trouble with them.
Yeah. So if there's any SWAC members online, if you're having any difficulty, either speak up or write something in the chat.
The three.
Yeah. And it won't restrict you, Robin, you'll be able to speak to all of them. It just will give us where we can start.
See, how do I hit continue? I click 3. Do I need to do anything after that?
After he clicks 3, is that good?
That's good.
Y'all just let.
I'm still seeing a few votes bounce around at the moment, so if we give it just maybe another second here.
You can tell us when it's over, Aubrey.
I think we're in pretty good shape. So seeing interest in community assessment, that's number 13. And the site development and permitting assessment, that's number 2. The natural resources assessment, that's number 11.
Thirteen, 2, and 11.
And then the transportation and environmental assessment are the next two. Number 9. And number 3.
You say 9 environmental side assessment?
Yeah, and number 3.
And then we've got lesser interest, but still some interest in water infrastructure assessment. That's number 4. Weather and air quality, that's number 10. And cost analysis, number 14.
All right, well, maybe we'll bounce around sequentially with the top 3, site development, permitting, natural resources, and community assessment. Can we jump to that one, too? Please?
Site development and permitting assessment. That's number 2. Thank you.
We'll mostly just have this up as a background. What would be some of the questions that have come to mind here on this topic?
One of the questions I had on this topic was, the difference in length of time, cost, and also complication between a potential NEPA study at the Moon Pit site versus going through LUBA review at Roth East. Because I've been through some LUBA plant before with some Center for Water Utilities, and it takes a long time. So I'm just curious whether, I know we have a timeline we're trying to stick to. If one of these sites gets chosen to want to actually starting construction and getting the infrastructure in place for it to operate. I'm just curious if there's any discussion on which process is the easier process to go through and which would have more impacts.
It was interesting. We talked about this yesterday, and one of the feelings, both of them have quite a bit of process required on land use and on environmental review through BLM, for instance, with Moon Pit. Moon Pits is probably more predictable, and with the LUBA process over, as well as other issues revolving around the wildlife issues and sage grouse, it's probably less predictable at Roth East, and it's hard to peg a number on that unpredictability, so to speak. And so I would just put it out that way, is that there's probably more upside potential as far as the schedule required for Roth East because of that.
I would agree with that. If I can make a distant opinion on that, yeah. I mean, in Roth East, Moon Pit, you're just widening the road, but then the wilderness folks may come out against it because they don't want the trucks. But on the other one, the LUBA, they might say, well, there's an alternate site. You shouldn't be tampering with farm and forest. And when you have another place you can go. And so, we're not going to approve this. And same thing, I don't know if Andrew knows, but if LUBA would factor in sage grouse in terms of their consideration of whether that's an appropriate site or not.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. I thought I'd weigh in on some of this. First, it doesn't automatically go to LUBA. It has to be an appeal of a decision.
Right.
And second, the basis outlined is the farm impacts test. So it's the impact of citing a land use a landfill facility on surrounding farm uses because it's zoned EFU. Sage grouse, they could try to, kind of bring that in if that's the scope of their appeal. But, as far as what's proposed, I would say that goes with a different part of the decision making. And then I also just kind of wanted to acknowledge that, that NEPA review, just like with Roth East, there are opportunities for folks to appeal those as well. So we can say LUBA because we're in Oregon and those kinds of decisions, when they are appealed, go to LUBA. But, the federal process for environmental review, whether it's an EA or a full-blown environmental analysis, I think really where it becomes really, unpredictable is the scope of the appeals that are filed. So we don't know, we can guess, who might be interested and who might file. The scope of the appeals, if it's appealed, whether it's sustained or remanded. And when you get in a situation where it's ping pong back and forth, remand, appealed again, remand, appealed again. And that could happen really for either site. So, it's so difficult to predict. And I think really the best thing we can do is just understand that there's going to be time where we're going to be, working through various appeals. And that's the beauty of our system here, is everybody gets the right to have their say in court and make sure that environmental resources are protected and analyzed, and farms are protected, what have you. So, but just thought I'd chime in, and I'm sitting right there. So if there's other questions, raise your hand and I'll come right back up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One thing I did want to clarify, Robin, you said widening of the road.
Yeah.
We actually don't see the need to widen the road. Yeah, it's pretty much within that right of way.
Okay.
And so it's not actually a right of way change.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That might make it a little easier.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't know if this fits under permitting, but Harrison mentioned, and I mentioned in the last meeting, the Fish and Wildlife Service potential listing. I think that should go somewhere in the report. That could become a real threat if it happened. Fish and Wildlife Service has considered listing sage grouse since 2005, and there've been several attempts at it, and just congressional budget writers right now are all that stop that. Over the next 100 years, it seems to me very likely that there'll be a point in politics where those writers won't be there, and it'll be listed. And that could have a significant impact. That should be at least mentioned in the report.
This isn't an official position from BLM, but we've discussed this with them, and they recently shared, the BLM draft EIS that was issued. But what I heard from one BLM staff person is that the intent of the draft EIS is to prevent sage grouse from being listed.
You're talking about this article here, but yeah, that's on BLM land, but I'm just thinking overall, the numbers keep going down dramatically. And so they have had these conservation, I forget it, CCSAs or whatever. All these things are attempts to avoid the listing, but at some point, if it keeps going down, they'll have to do it. And so I think it just should be at least mentioned in the report as a possible threat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
This might be a question more for Tim, and I think we talked about this kind of early on in the process, but I'm just trying to remember, because some of these like 2029 is only 5 years away, and these timelines, particularly if there's appeals, are looking longer than that. Can you just remind us, like, how big of a deal that is? What kind of happens if not fills up, and then one or either of these sites is held up for longer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, I will say that we're trying to look at ways that we can extend the life. Right now, we're based on current fill rates, we're seeing that our timeline is early 2030. We've moved past November of 2029. We're looking to see if there are other ways we can do some diversion of waste, whether it's through recovery or potential disposal, elsewhere in some increments, as well as trying to figure out how we're going to do our closure system of the landfill, and can we buy additional time by modifying our closure plan, not changing the heights of the facility, but really looking at the materials that we use at closure to buy another year of time. So ideally, we're trying to see if we're assuming that we're going to have some challenges on this timeline.
Yeah.
That we're at 5 to 6 years, and we assume that we could be at least 5 years for permitting and legal challenges. And we have to anticipate that it's going to be at least that and potentially longer.
Yeah.
So we will be looking at what are some of our avenues, and it's going to impact the cost of disposal for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah.
Any other questions on this topic?
I mean, my observation is that both sites have different risks, but relatively significant risks. And there's a fair bit of unknowns about how long it might be. So it's sort of a wash. That's all we talk to the state, like what, you know, or some combination. East in particular.
Yeah, and I think we do, you know, the report that you have in the paper, and there was pretty significant BLM report that came out on the 14th, and we have to make sure that we review that to see if that's had any further impact. So I know Taya and other folks are looking at that, but I think we'll have more ability to respond to that at our next meeting as well.
To me, the risks are higher on Roth East because of the sage grouse than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably right.
Hey, can we put you on the spot regarding the draft EIS? I think she's on.
Is she on, Sue?
Curious from your read of the draft EIS, if there are any findings on how this might impact the permitting framework, process, timeline.
I have not had time to do a deep dive, but you know, we did follow all of the current ODFW recommendations in our due diligence, and we, as Andrew mentioned, we worked with them on the habitat quantification tool. You know, if that BLM document is in fact sort of in line with the current standards, then I think our due diligence level assessment is reliable. But we definitely can take a closer look at that.
Thank you, Taya. Also, the boundaries that we assumed in our report for the core and low density habitats were in line with the proposed zones, which were then adopted by BLM. So kind of had a jump on those. And so those have already been taken into account.
That's correct. We did use the most up-to-date LEC data that ODFW has. We used the most up-to-date 2023 boundaries for those core and low density areas.
Thank you, Taya. I guess kind of touching back on that point of the predictability and time frame. My take on the difference there is, you know, BLM in the NEPA process has a lot of process, takes a lot of time, which, like Dwight mentioned, is perhaps more predictable in that sense. Roth East has with its permitting framework, could take a lot longer, and a lot of that is dependent on the level of appeal, and like Stephanie mentioned, challenges that are brought to the site. So, and those different review processes. So, not sure how that plays in, but yeah, just a lot of hoops to jump through with NEPA review. But if there aren't a substantial number of appeals, that could be it. Whereas a site that draws a lot of public opposition, that creates less certainty about the time frame, potential extension. But the process itself could be short if there are no appeals. Relatively short.
Yeah, relatively short.
You know, yeah, that's the variable.
You want to jump into the natural resources?
Yeah, let's do that. What were the questions on the natural resources?
That's
section?
number 11.
11, yeah. Got these handy tabs on the left.
You might guess I have a number of comments on that one. Should I go ahead?
Yeah.
I think as Andrew mentioned, the additional Roth property is probably not appropriate wildlife mitigation for sage grouse, mule deer, elk, or pronghorn. Sage grouse would be impacted by avian predators. And instead of just saying ravens, I could ask Andrew to clarify, but I think there's other avian predators too, right? But the ravens are the most common.
Especially nest and hatchling predators, yeah. Big concern.
But you may want to say there's also, say, ravens and other avian predators. And especially if you have 35 trucks a day, and if you have to haul water, would that be additional trucks coming in to the 35? So that should be mentioned that there would be still more. And that would be a major disturbance, not just, the predators on sage grouse, but also on mule deer, pronghorn, elk, to have that much, that much noise and vehicle traffic and dust and everything else. So I think that's one point. And then another one, I think, is that there's no mention of the threat of wildfire in the report. I mentioned that last time. Large range fires do occur and will continue to occur and would impact Roth East. The odds are at Roth East are much higher than at Moon Pit. The Badlands, historically, my understanding from the studies, has seldom ever had a large fire. It's, there's just too much space between the plants out there to carry a lot of fire versus range fires across that grassland at Roth East coming off Pine Mountain, or some just people there. And that would really impact, if you had a major fire out there, impact landfill operations. So I think that should be mentioned. There's no mention of greenhouse gas emissions, unless I totally missed it. There's a lot in this report. I tried, but and maybe it's in there and I just missed it. A comparison on that, which would be similar maybe to.
Yeah, actually, we.
Right here.
Yeah.
Previous page.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Take that back then. I missed that one then. Sorry.
Yeah, it's actually under weather and air quality just because.
Oh, okay.
It kind of falls in there under greenhouse
Okay.
gas.
Sorry. And let's see.
One question on that though, Dwight, in regards to greenhouse gas. If down the road, let's say trucks that are used for hauling material become electric versus diesel gas now, would that impact the change in this bar graph? Did you take that consideration at all, or is it all based on diesel?
Well, electric is the third.
Yeah, so we're
Energy source.
transitioning, we're transitioning over that period of time. So early years diesel, and then into renewable natural gas, which is actually sourced from the landfill.
Right.
And then after that, electricity, which could be a combination of electricity sourced at the landfill or, solar or whatever,
Right.
And the greenhouse gas emissions you'll see there's still greenhouse gas emissions associated with it because it's part of the energy mix.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure this chart was just based on vehicles or something that actually, like you said, solar, it's something that's been, as part of it as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
It would depend on the source of even the.
Yep.
Right now, it stays coal like it is.
Yeah.
Pacific Power. Yeah. And I think another key point is that.
I have a real quick question about.
Yeah.
Where in this.
Right.
I don't remember right exactly.
may be
I think it's also under the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be in the air quality and weather summary. This, I will admit, this was a late add into it, and it was a separate memo, so that might not have gotten into the air quality summary, but that's a good reminder. We can work that into that appendix.
Yeah, well, there should be some mention right in the main document too, given that's a state priority.
Yeah, I was curious about the assumptions about the electricity too, because there is state legislation that requires our utility providers to be carbon free by 2040. So I was just curious what the source of those emissions were under the electricity.
Yeah, I think they looked at the energy mix for where the energy provider that they'd be charging from, which includes,
Well, right, because by 2040, like we have state legislation that by 2040, all of it will be seen in the investor-owned utilities with the carbon free. So based on just the fuel source, I would expect it to be lower.
Gotcha.
But it may be that they're factoring in like upstream emissions from the development of the vehicles and that sort of thing, so that's.
Yeah, and that's, so you see, we have the renewable natural gas starting in 2040. And so that is kind of that timing. And yes, there are other greenhouse gas emissions that are including fugitive emissions. I mean, and so, you do need to make sure you account for everything. Yeah.
I guess I had one other kind of main point in the natural resource. And I think that the whole analysis, maybe I'm just not getting this part, doesn't recognize that mining of Moon Pit will continue regardless of what happens with the landfill decision. And so if you look at a broader, you call it cumulative impacts, if we don't put a landfill in Roth East will stay some kind of quasi graze natural somehow.
Right.
But Moon Pit will still be mined. So that impact on Moon Pit is going to occur. It just depends whether Hooker Creek does it in combination with the county or not. So I think that's an overall big picture thing that's missing in the report.
Thank you. Any other questions in natural resources or?
Water rights is a different problem.
Water rights are different? Yeah.
So the next one?
Yep.
Okay. Water infrastructure assessment. That is section 4.
Actually, it was community assessment.
Yeah, community assessment is the next one that was priority. Then we can circle back to the next tier. So let's go to 13. Community assessment. I'll let you leave this one. Or take the questions here. What are the questions regarding the community assessment section?
I'm taking minutes too, so forgive me. for
Okay.
that. I'm not ignoring you.
Somebody have questions on this?
Yeah, this is.
Maybe this is more of a comment and just of a need to mention it more, given, what we've heard from the folks in Milliken elsewhere. I think it's in the report, but it doesn't maybe jump out as much as it should. The diminished recreation experience driving along, Pine Mountain Road, up to Milliken Valley, whether or not it would impact the paragliders. I guess there were different opinions on that. Just somewhere in the summaries, I guess, kind of the overall people that hunt or do other things in Milliken Valley, residents that go for walks out of their homes. I don't know, but it does a general, maybe an overall impact that a recreational experience from a landfill.
I think in the past as well, you had used like a unit of measurement, like residences within like 1 mile of the site. That might be good to include in this section too.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, no guarantee, but I think there would be more potential appeals on the Roth East side in regards to actual land use and obviously ODF&W as well. Just if you think about all the community input we've had so far on that site versus the Moon Pit site, which has already been excavated to a certain extent so far. Yeah.
I think we should probably put in the cumulative input that we've received to quantify the amount of community comment.
Right.
Yeah,
For this one versus the.
That's right.
Moon Pit.
It currently has a table summary, kind of a tabular summary, but the full comment record is obviously part of this public process with the SWAC too. So that could be part of the useful.
Yeah, those are all great ideas. Where we can quantify public concerns and kind of represent that in a with a quantity for the analysis, that's great. And happy to do that. There's some things that are a little tougher to quantify and analyze, like recreational impacts or what the impacts would be for, you know, a paragliding site a mile away. Some of that's more qualitative, and so we've taken the approach of representing what has been said by the public in those concerns, but is arguably outside the scope of our analysis and something that is tough to objectively analyze. But we want to make sure to represent what's been said, especially in this section.
Any other comments on this one?
I will just make a comment for those who might be online that we continue to receive comments that we've received over the last 3 days since we issued the report and the comments with it. We've received at least 10 more comments in regards to the Roth East site. We've not received any specific comments regarding the Moon Pit site, but those will be part of the record for the next meeting.
Just a general note on the report, we still have it as a draft because it's still being developed, and the idea is that the SWAC here would have a chance to kind of put fingerprints on this and have input on it. And so, you know, we have a chance here to incorporate these comments that have been made today, also public comment to wrap that into this section in particular, and describe, you know, the decision that is made over the next couple of months. So the document is still being built, so to speak, and will be final then. So I think we'll have a chance to document the full scope of public comment received up through the process as a part of this.
You want to jump into the transportation system assessment and then the environmental assessment?
Yeah, have to. The transportation system assessment.
That's number 3.
So I put that as one of my questions related to greenhouse gas emissions, but it's already been answered, I think, essentially. So just, you know, I do see it's not in the report under the air quality, it's not mentioned at all, so yeah, get in there.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
And I don't know if there's anything from your point earlier that needs to be addressed in terms of the consumption of electricity.
I'm assuming that it's in the memo, the assumptions that they use, but if we could just.
Yeah. Yep.
That could be included, then I would think it's answered in there.
Yep.
Maybe you can email us that memo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it should mention the additional trucks for water to Roth East.
Yeah. That's true.
Right. Additional trips, truck trips.
Under this section, that would make
For Roth
sense.
East, right?
Yeah.
Plus water trucks for Roth East.
I did have a question. Would the access to Roth East be paved? Would it need to be paved under this?
To Roth East.
Yeah.
Yes. We assume that it's paved.
So you have that cost factored in.
It is. Yep.
And then what was the other one? Would that intersection with Highway 20 then have to be rebuilt, and who would pay for that?
Be a part of the development cost. The county to have
that factored into.
To have a new approach.
Yeah.
To the highway. There's many options, as you may have seen in the report, for connection with the driveway. 2 would use the existing Pine Mountain intersection, and then 2 are available further east to Highway 20, but by a separate entrance. 1 going through county land, and then another taking Ford Road and then tying in to Highway 20 further east.
I have to think of a landfill roundabout with some artwork.
Yeah. Sage grouse art piece.
You can commission that.
Yeah. Art in public spaces.
Yeah.
I'll jump into environmental assessment.
Let's do that. Questions on this section?
And that's section 11, is that correct?
Yeah. Section 9.
9.
Now I am guessing this might have been thinking that it was something other than what it is, which is just a phase one environmental site assessment phase one, which is just a property acquisition process, you know, the process that we go through whenever you acquire property, evaluating each of these sites for potential hazardous materials, hazardous site. Was there something more that folks had envisioned here? Okay. Both sites are, well, especially Roth East, there's really nothing there of concern that was identified. Pretty much the same for Moon Pit. It is an existing industrial site, so there's more potential for it. And those were identified, but still not of great concern.
Okay, next section of interest, I think was,
Oh yeah, water infrastructure 4.
oh yeah, we'll go to water infrastructure at 4. Yep, 4. Questions on this section?
Just a general thought. Is that it seems like potential insufficient water rights at Roth East might be more problematic than outlined in the report, but I don't know if that's true. Because I guess you said the water trucking can overcome that, but
Yeah, so with an exempt well, the county could draw out 5,000 gallons per day. And that would be sufficient for water needs in the winter months. But then in the summer months, I believe it's between March and October, or April and October, water use rises well above 5,000 gallons per day. It even peaks as high as 50,000 gallons per day in summer months. And so to supplement what the exempt well on site could produce at 5,000 gallons per day, water trucks would be needed. And so we accounted for the volume, that additional volume needed to supplement, how many trips that would take, what the cost per trip was, and that was accounted for in the cost estimate.
But Moon Pit doesn't have that problem.
Doesn't. It's a different scenario though, where the water right in both cases, water rights aren't available to the county or offered with the property. But Moon Pit's willing to sell water to the county at a reasonable cost. What had been discussed was and used in our assumption was let me see if I have it in here. It was a reasonable price. I think it came out to be about $50,000 per year for that water use charge. But the county was willing to get water.
Any kind of guarantee to that'll continue for 100 years?
Well, that would have to be negotiated. The intention on both sites is to procure water rights over a period of time. So with Hooker Creek, they've stated that they would supply water until such time as the county was able to secure water rights at that location. And that's what we'd be trying to do at Roth East as well.
There are temporary water supply options, more expensive temporary option at Roth East than at Moon Pit. But there's
And all those costs are factored in there.
Yeah.
You'll see it in the operating cost table.
The water truck, is that factored into the GHG analysis, or is that just hauling?
And that's one that we need to check on, Mike, because to make sure that it was included. Yeah.
Talked about the excavator going up in a different way, but I'm not.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's in the GHG, so we'll make sure it is.
Yeah, we'd have to assume at a time when it would no longer be needed, perhaps, and when water rights can be acquired. Perhaps that's 2040, so or more, it takes time to get water rights permits.
Yeah.
So, but we'll make a note to account for water trucks.
For Moon Pit, like if the county gets water rights later, does that mean that they would have to haul the water? Like, are we assuming that they would be able to get water rights on the property still? Yeah.
At Moon Pit.
Yeah.
And then make use of the existing well. There may need to be some upgrades made, but the fact that there's already an authorized point of diversion to on site is could be a benefit and ease water rights permitting. Although the water rights that are there aren't expected to stay with the property.
Yeah, so the idea is that existing well is used while, under the current scenario of getting some water right from Hooker Creek. And then when a new water right is brought on, that same well is used in the same way. So it's a paper change. It's not a well change.
Right.
Yep.
Whereas on Roth East, it's possible and likely that we would have to drill another.
Yeah. Yep.
And that cost is accounted for in the.
What was that? Yeah, so the question for people online was, has there been a study or is it looked at the aquifer under Milliken and how much water is available there? Is that correct generally? Yeah.
Yeah, so the geology and hydrogeology section 4.6 in the report covers this more specifically. The water infrastructure assessment is more so focused on what's needed to meet the water needs. But then hydrogeology examines depth to groundwater, availability of water. It's kind of interesting in its location between monitoring wells. The nearest one is Brothers, which actually, interestingly, doesn't show evidence of decline, and it's been determined as a stable aquifer, which is wonderful. And the depth to groundwater is estimated around 450 to 500 feet
at least
deep. It's around 900 at deep well, but deep well is way up the hill. So what we've seen, and there's some really cool maps, piezometric maps, in that report appendix, in its appendix, showing the depth of groundwater and basically the water surface elevation, the groundwater elevation above mean sea level, and it's roughly around, I think, 3,900 or so. So it's from all the wells, roughly 450 or 500 feet deep below where the site is. Monitoring well. 20 miles, 10 miles. They're fairly sparse, especially out there. So yeah, not sure how great of an indication that is, but that's the best data available of the regional aquifer. And the conditions, there's more of a description there on kind of the qualities of the hydrogeologic framework and its protection of groundwater. But there's a lot of depth to groundwater, that's known. And the soil qualities provide good groundwater protection.
You want to speak to what is it at Moon Pit as well?
At Moon Pit, the depth to groundwater is quite a bit deeper. I believe it's at least 850 feet deep. And it's separated by a lot of rock, a lot more rock. Whereas Roth East has more sediment deposits above the groundwater aquifer.
But the stability of the aquifer at Moon Pit?
Oh, they're both stable as far as we can tell. And I think a big part of that is just that there's a lot less use of that aquifer. It was previously a lake
in those areas,
and in that area, the use is much lower than other areas of Central Oregon, where it's.
I think we touched on the weather and air quality. That's top 1 4.
Yeah, are there any other questions on that?
I just thought the executive summary or conclusions ought to mention that, the concerns have been raised over paragliding, hang gliding, and the dust devils and the wind up in Milliken. I know you covered elsewhere, you mentioned it. But those could be all factors that maybe ought to be mentioned somewhere in the summary also, because a lot of people will never get past the executive summary.
Yeah, I mean, we need to keep that area pretty tight.
Yeah.
Can't go into too much detail.
Yeah.
But in the section 4.9, you'll see there was specific narrative added for Rothies with respect to the concerns about wind and dust devils.
Yep.
And that is under section 4.9.2.3.
Yeah.
You see
No,
that
I
section?
remember seeing it there, but I just thought maybe the executive summary ought to have a sentence or something about some of those concerns.
Okay.
You know, if there's a weather station up on Pine Mountain from the observatory?
I would imagine there is. We will. Yeah. We can,
We might want to look at some of that data, because I think when you're looking at wind speed for Pine Mountain, we're using the Redmond wind speed data, and I think that we probably want to see if we can find something more local.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Horse Ridge.
Observatory one has some trees around it. It's just not too bad.
Is that publicly available and continuous monitoring? Okay, great.
The Horse Ridge Weather Station is located on Highway 20 and then 2325 US Forest Service Road, right at that intersection. It's up in the Northern Valley.
Okay. Thank you.
That one, and and the Pine Mountain one, then there's another one called TP Draw. It also records wind and temperature, those three.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because I think we're a little deficient in wind speed in the report. So. Yeah.
Okay, other sections of interest?
There was some in the cost section.
Okay.
What was that? Cultural resources. Okay.
Let's jump to 12, cultural resources, and then we'll go to 14. Questions on that?
So my question there was just really about what amount of consultation with the tribe has actually happened without the archaeological consulting firm that was hired to do the site assessment. I mean, I know that that's been challenged so far, so I'm just wondering if there's an update on that, and what seems to me to be of what has it happened.
As part of the communications effort, we were have in process to do another round of outreach to the 3 tribes, given the stage of the decision process and the findings being available now, and see if that take that conversation where it comes and offer a briefing and so forth from the team to share kind of the status and get input.
So there hasn't been any response basically to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are doubling down some on that as far as, getting it out to more folks at the different tribes. Yeah.
Gathered some additional contacts.
Yep.
I'm looking at this, that the culture resource, risk of finding things that might impact some would be slightly higher at Roth East.
Yeah, probably more than slightly higher. I mean, because it is an undisturbed site as opposed to Moon Pit, which is heavily disturbed.
Maybe that should be mentioned.
It actually is in the reports, in the report as well as in the.
Okay.
Yeah, discipline reports.
Yep. Good there. Okay, so 14, cost analysis. There's 2 slides pertinent to this one. The table, which is rather dense, a lot there, and then the cost forecast comparison. Questions on that?
Not a question, but it still seems like the cost of acquiring Moon Pit is higher than it needs to be, but that's just a comment. Did that, at the last meeting, we talked about how population growth might affect these projections. Did you guys go back and look at kind of if the population, kind of a range, if population growth was this, if it was this, how that would affect the the outcome, I guess.
We did consider that.
Mhm.
It's not something that would really be a differentiator between the sites because we've applied the same assumptions to both sides. And really the emphasis of this study is comparative analysis. So if there's something that would draw out a difference between the sites, then that's worth doing now. Otherwise, that would be great to do with a selected site to really pin down the timing and the phasing. So that's something that we tabled for deeper analysis later. The assumptions that have been used are based on for population is a continuation of the coordinated Deschutes County population forecast done by the Portland Population Research Center, which assumes a 1.1% growth rate.
I don't think they factor in limiting resources. At some point, something will curtail that. I don't know what that point is, but.
Well, to some degree, I think they've accounted for that in that it's coming down from the 2.8 or 2.2 that it's at now and steadily declining over the years.
No, but what I mean is like some point water rights or some other thing is some physical factor or some other, or just political, might just say, we've had enough.
Yeah, I think what it would do, it would expand the lifespan of the landfill. If I don't think it's going to go higher than that number.
Right.
I think your limiting factors is probably accurate, but that's my opinion. But it would be it would expand the life term, and it might increase the cost per ton, the line around line 10. Cost per ton over the lifespan might be a bit more expensive. I think where it won't have much impact is that 20-year cost per ton, which is the reason that is higher is right now we're looking at a bond term on this of 20 years. We may want to look at what's our cost per ton if we extend it to a 30-year term with a slightly higher interest rate. That's an area where we could play with it, but I think those costs on a per ton basis are probably closer to accurate than the long-term estimate if you're thinking the life cycle might expand out.
I think you included the power line easements to Roth East in your cost. I mean, to acquire them.
Yeah, the extension cost is accounted for in initial development. Any other questions on cost analysis?
Raise hand.
There's a raised hand online.
Okay.
Yeah, who is it? Keith? Yeah, go ahead, Keith. Keith, I'm not sure if you're muted. You want to?
Yes, can you hear me now, Tim?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. I was just curious if the cost estimate has gone down to the granular level in regards to the comparison between Roth East and Moon Pit in regards to, cost per 1,000 per household. So meaning, over the lifespan of the landfill, would it cost Deschutes County residents more per 1,000 for their home on either of those two sites? Has that been calculated down to that granular level?
No, the way this would actually run through is on their refuse bill.
Okay, got it.
As opposed to, it's not a property tax impact, so it's a use impact. But we could take a look at how we would lay that out. Roughly, it's currently, because it's how it runs through the bill. The disposal portion is only a percentage. It's about 20% of your disposal bill. So that difference in cost is probably in the range of not even 10 cents a month, maybe 15 cents a month. But we can pull that up and try and provide that to you.
No, I think it would just be interesting to have that stated somewhere in the report, just so that way, the general population understands that there's not much of a impact financially to them on either of the locations.
Okay. Yeah, we'll see how we can codify that for you.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Which cost per ton,
Yeah.
over the lifetime versus the current cost per ton.
It would be a comparative cost between one over the other. What's that $43 a ton versus 45 versus 48?
Right.
It's-
What we're paying today, what we might pay at what we might pay.
Yeah.
at Roth's.
Yeah.
And then that goes
But
in.
it really important to not do dollars per thousand. We do not want to give people the impression
No.
that this is some kind of property tax
No.
increase. This is a,
No.
40,
It's basically
type
your
of fund that's separate from property taxes.
correct. And the way it impacts customers is based on
Right,
their
their bill.
garbage bill.
Right,
Yeah.
either what they're paying at home to the garbage collection company or
Right.
when they go to the land.
Or they go to the landfill. Yeah.
That's a good way to boil it down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that would, yeah, they'd feel that when they go do self-haul. And then as a part of the fee charged by the franchise hauler.
Right.
And like you said, that accounts for 20%. Much of it's just their hauling and operating costs.
Yeah.
That is a part of the collection bill.
But you're factoring in closure costs into the fees that you're charging. I mean, the whole picture for the county. is the cost.
It's different than just this disposal
Yeah,
cost.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that amount is accounted for in the tipping fee.
Correct.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So we can do two things. What is the impact to the tip fee?
Mhm.
So at the transfer stations that will be paid by the self hauler. And then how does that also trickle down to the collection customer
Right.
out there? Because both of them are pretty important. I mean, that tip fee, that is what people see actually as a cost per ton, at the gate. And so it's really cost forward for those folks who do self haul. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Y'all may have seen the bulletin article saying this is a $1 billion decision. You may see it's actually closer to a $2 billion in the total lifespan costs.
Yeah.
You guys just had high pay.
Big project.
Mhm.
And that's over 100 years.
Yeah.
And these are in 2023 dollars, so. Any other questions on the cost analysis here? Looking at the table or the graph? I guess it might be helpful to describe a bit on the graph what's going on, since there's a lot there. The cumulative costs, the left axis, describes the cumulative costs, and that correlates to the lines. And that's the cost, adding up year after year, to kind of show the trend of total costs. And then annual costs are on the right, and that correlates to kind of those skinny bars for each year. And the range of moon pit costs is shown by the orange and yellow. The lower end being the mining alternate, where there's a good synergy and economic kind of mutual benefit for mining and landfill excavation. And then orange is the higher end of that. And then blue would be the annual cost for Roth East. And that up front, you see there's the first couple of years, that's, permitting, design. And then 2030, you see those two big spikes kind of start. That's the initial development, breaking ground. And then those other spikes that occur, that's cell development and closure occurring. Those happen every couple of years, to, keep growing the landfill and closing areas that are filled up. And so that you can kind of see though how the orange and yellow, it trends higher above Roth. And that includes both the development, like expanding the landfill, closing cells that are filled, and the operational costs. And Moon Pit runs higher than, in the orange and yellow than the blue for the first many years. But then that gap starts to close as the operational costs of Roth East start to tick up with the additional haul cost. It is cheaper to develop, but it is more expensive to haul to. That's how I would sum it up.
We talked earlier about there may be some additional mitigation costs and all that on Roth East that we haven't factored in. or other things, water or whatever, would you show a range on Rothy's, or is that not going to be significant enough to, at these costs to?
I don't think it would show a tremendous difference. I mean, potentially, hauling water, it's also unknown how long that would be. Perhaps 30 years would be a conservative assumption on the time frame to get water rights permits. And then, accounting for the fee in lieu mitigation, an extra 7 million over the 1.5 assumed, 6.5. I don't think that's going to show up on this scale.
But I think where we will see because we said we'll come back with that range, and I think where we'll see it is in the 20-year cost.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Right.
point of impact. Yeah, the first 20 years.
To have a range there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts? Any other topics that weren't yet discussed that are of interest?
Well, we might have given ourselves an extra hour.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, maybe just a general thought.
Yeah.
As to whether they're going to be ready next week for a recommendation. There's still a lot of, there's a lot of detailed technical information here and further work that's going to be done to fine tune all that. Would we need any fine tuning to make a decision next month? I mean, a recommendation next month? Or you still need to do a lot of homework?
There's also a time period for providing written comment, which is, I think a slide up, 1 or 2 slides forward, describes that, highlighted March 29th, when we'd like SWAC feedback returned. And then we'll be able to update the report at least a week ahead of the April 16th meeting.
And partly what we'll do in that, we'll also do kind of an just identify and bullet out those things that have changed, comments and how that impacted, so that you don't have to go through the whole thing to winnow those out. But that'll be more helpful for you so that you can kind of see, oh, okay, this is how it changed based upon.
So all the
based
stuff
on
we talked
comments.
about today that you were taking notes on will be factored in.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, and we will make efforts to get that final report out more than a week in advance if we can. It depends on the level of detail of what we have to follow up on. And we'll see at that meeting if the SWAC is at a point where it's comfortable to make that decision at the end of the meeting. We will want to make sure that people have also gotten copies. We provided it in the packet, but Anda made comments. We expect that we may get additional agency comments over the next couple of weeks. And I think what we'll make sure we do is we'll get those out not only in the packet, but if they come, 2 weeks in advance, it might make sense, particularly if it's agency comment, that we get those out to SWAC members as soon as we receive them.
Okay.
All right.
But you feel pretty good that we'll be at a point that the number, all these things from cost or whatever.
I think we'll be able to gather it, but that will be that will be up to you as to whether we've satisfied your questions and concerns.
And the sooner we get SWAC feedback, the sooner we can get started on it. We've got a good head start of comments gathered today that we can get working on right away. But yeah, please don't wait till March 29th. Keep the window open.
Yeah.
But if more things come to mind, in the next couple of days, try
And
to get
more.
it to us as soon as you can.
I think I got most of mine.
And it's much easier. I mean, this works for us to jot it down, but if you type it, and we get it, that's much easier to incorporate
Yep.
also.
Yep. Yeah, it's great to have that.
Okay. Yeah, still, these both of these don't seem like, they're both are problematic sites. I still feel we maybe passed up opportunities we shouldn't have early in the process, but that maybe the train has left the station, I guess. But the Highway 97 side, Rickett Road, and some of those other ones, except for the opposition from, that airport guideline and all the local opposition kind of threw things out maybe a little too quickly, but those would have been a much better deal for the taxpayer or the environment than either one of these. But
Yeah.
I have a question. When this recommendation is brought to the Board of County Commissioners, they would have the option of adopting either of the sites. Is there any option for them to adopt or elect to not choose either of the sites?
Yeah, so for the people online who might not have heard the question from the public, so the question was, the recommendation that goes to the board, will the board have the option to accept the recommendation or choose the site that's not recommended, or not choose either site? And yes, it's entirely at the discretion of the Board of County Commissioners to choose one, the other, or neither. We will be providing to the county commissioners, and it will be provided to this group as well. In the solid waste master plan that was done in 2019, there were a review of options. And part of the master plan is to review those on a regular basis. And alternatives were reviewed about in 2021. We are refreshing those as well, and that information will be available for this group at next month, which would be what is the cost, anticipated cost for disposal out of the county, as well as an update of, are there any other alternative modes of disposal that could be used as well. So that refresh is being finalized right now with a consulting firm that's been hired by the county. So that information will also be available to the County Board of Commissioners as well.
But you're saying that's going to be available to this committee? to
Yeah.
review the results of that at the next
Yeah,
meeting?
that'll be available at the next meeting.
So then maybe I am sorry to hesitate on the decision
Yep.
point then, if that's on that Tuesday. If we're essentially reintroducing a new set of data into the discussion. For this group anyway.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that, but I think it's maybe takes a little more discussion and thought. Prior to that meeting, to be able to make the call on April 20th or 19th, whatever.
Yeah. Understood. And so it is at the discretion of this group to say, do we want one more meeting? But
For the record, that's my inclination probably.
yeah, okay. Anything else? Question from the public?
There seems to be quite a bit of heartburn over this sage grouse situation. And one of the options that the Roths had put forth was to buy the entire ranch, which was 3,400 acres. And also the grazing permit on Pine Mountain and the BLM grazing, which would add another 22,000 acres of habitat. That's about another 35 square miles. So I believe that's still on the table. If that wages anybody's idea, well, what Andrew has told us is the piece of Roth east of Pine Mountain Road is not acceptable. You've got a whole bunch more country out there. Now, I don't know what maybe Ryan could tell us how you figure that out, but if you take Pine Mountain, any kind of a vertical topography and flatten it out, you're gonna get a lot more acres. And that's all high timber, there's old road forest up there. There's a lot of grass, there's meadows. And for an additional, I think, $2 million and a half, that would be thrown into the mix, so.
Yeah, so for those online who didn't hear the comment that the representative involved with Roth East property had spoken to the fact that there were additional options in terms of purchase, expanding the amount of area purchased and grazing rights purchased. And we did say to the group earlier that we will include that for the next meeting in terms of part of the cost as the assessment. All right.
A lot of that property is public land.
Correct.
Obviously for the grazing rights, so would the county retire the grazing rights and then say that less cows on the landscape would mean more sage grouse habitat? Would that be the thinking?
That would make Glenda very happy. Cattle free and everything.
Yeah, that would be part of part of the assessment.
Steve, if you could provide an addendum to your solicitation letter that details the grazing rights.
Okay.
And the cost for that, that'd be great.
You'd also have to determine that the present grazing was impacting sage grouse. And which a lot of ranchers would quarrel with. I don't know, that might be another can of worms there. The other thing is they still got the avian predators in one, but
It would require further study to assess the habitat there
Yeah.
as a part of mitigation.
Yeah.
With the value of it.
We wouldn't have time to assess the value there for mitigation by next week or next month.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments? All right.
Great, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for their time. Members of the public, thank you for your input. And we'll see you next month.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Do our best to fill in all these gaps.
Yeah.